Shalom and welcome to this home edition of the Middle East Report. In this program today, I have a guest all the way from Israel. Warm welcome to the program. And today's guest is David Silver from Out of Zion Ministries to give us an Israel update on the events that are shaping Israel in the Middle East today. David, warm welcome to the program.
Yeah, well, shalom, Simon, and shalom to all of the Revelation viewers.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Now, we're recording this program and all the high holidays are finished because we recently had Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. It's known, of course, in Hebrew as the high holidays, the feast of the Lord. How have the high holidays been for you and your family this year?
Well, actually, Simon, they were amazing. You know, in the midst of all the pressure that's going on here with the COVID, with the vaccines, with the arguments over green passports, I tell you what, the whole holiday season just felt peaceful. Lots of people were out shopping and buying, which is always a good sign. And the weather had cooled down a little bit. We got a few little sprinkles of rain, not very much at all. But you know, as far as I remember, it's probably one of the best holiday seasons that we've experienced in 27 years in Israel.
Is that something to do with the lack of foreign visitors visiting the land, or do you think this is more of a Israelis really beginning to search a bit deeper into themselves to look at some of their kind of Jewish roots and to read the word more? What do you think?
I don't know, really. I mean, I just think that because of all of the craziness that we've had, you know, through the year, you know, I think people, particularly Sukkot, and Sukkot is the time to, you know, we're supposed to rejoice before the Lord, it says. So just particularly those 8 days of Sukkot, there really was that rejoicing, happy kind of atmosphere here. I just think people were glad to be out and be able to go shopping. They didn't bring any lockdowns in. Maybe that was it, that they just didn't lock us down this year like they had last year. So anyway, it's all behind us, and the shops are back to normal now. We can go out and you know, just travel around without traffic jams and without big lines in the stores. So until Hanukkah, a kol b'sheket, everything's quiet.
Kol hakavod. So David, can you just give us an update of how the situation is with Israel in COVID? Because we know that there's a new government in place led by Naftali Bennett, the new prime minister. There's even a new president in place with Isaac Herzog as well. So it's definitely a change of the political scene within the Israeli government. But we also hear that the cases of COVID have gone up in Israel, that Israel's very cautious. So what's the situation now with COVID-19? Because here in Britain, it seems like you guys are a couple of months, if not 3 months ahead of us.
Yeah, we are really. I mean, Israel's ahead of the world in getting it, dealing with it, and getting rid of it. So, and Prime Minister Bennett is handling it very differently than Prime Minister Netanyahu. And he really promised us and kept his word that there wouldn't be a lockdown over the holidays. And he asked people not to travel overseas. Of course, they all did. There was one situation where a lot of these Hasidic Jews who went up to the Ukraine to pray at the grave of their rabbi, they came back, and a large number of them were infected. So by the beginning of September, we were getting I think over 10,000 a day new infections, which was actually surpassed the highest day back in January when we had the previous wave. And positive test rate was over 8%. That's really the telltale indicator is the positive test rate. That means the number of people that are tested who show positive. So that was 8%. And the R rate, which is the rate at which people infect others, was over 1.1. Anything over 1 is bad. Anyhow, that was a month ago. And, you know, of course, over the holidays, we had no school, so the kids were at home, but a lot of people were traveling around and fellowshipping. So maybe that balanced itself out. And now we're in a situation where life's back to normal, not so much traveling around and fellowship, but the kids are back in school. And I did see that a few days ago, 54% of the new infections were in Arab locations, and the second largest people group were school kids. But anyway, the good news, Simon, is as of what's today? Anyway, as of Sunday last week, it was down to 1.88% positive rate and 0.8% R rate. The day after it went up to 2, but it's still down pretty low. And the government, again, last Sunday, the government was going to up the green passport to say that people that had been vaccinated more than 6 months ago had to get the 3rd booster shot or lose their green passport. And what happened was the Sunday morning when that was supposed to come in, so many of them logged on the health department computer to upgrade their green passport. It totally blew the system. Amazing. And so they said, well, we'll leave it for a few days, but it hasn't come in. And it looks like they're actually backing off because the numbers are now down. They're actually relaxing the green passport regulation. So really, I think we just have to watch and see what results we'll get from the kids being back at school. And also in early November, the government is going to open up the airport to, for the fully vaccinated tourists, which will make a lot of people in the UK happy. So they've got it under control. They're doing their best, and at this point in time, it's it's on its way down, which is good news.
Yeah, really appreciate that update, David. I suppose the big story that's really dominating Israel and has been the focus of the Israeli government is the possibility that the Iranian regime could be weeks away from achieving nuclear breakout. In other words, turning enrichment of the uranium into nuclear weapons. And we know that the International Atomic Energy Agency has warned that the Iranian regime is very close. And we see that, for example, the Biden administration is very keen to open up negotiations with the Iranian regime that's got a new president, and that they want to re-kick the Iran deal. So how is this going down in Israel, and what are the options left to Naftali Bennett regarding this very serious threat that Israel faces from the Iranian regime?
Okay, well, first of all, Naftali Bennett and Benny Gantz, who is the defense minister, they've been saying for weeks that Iran was 10 weeks, 8 weeks, 4 weeks away from achieving nuclear weapons capability. But Yossi Cohen, who was the former head of Mossad, he's like Israel's super James Bond. He basically, a few days ago, said that Iran is not anywhere near that level, but other reports are saying they've achieved 80% of the necessary uranium enrichment to be able to produce weapons. Some interesting side issues that are connected is that there is rumors of Israeli F-35s, that's the latest fighter jets, being stationed at some Air Force base in Azerbaijan, which is right on the border of Iran. And also I see in the last couple of days that Israel's placed an order with Boeing, I guess it is, in the United States, for 8 KC-35 super tankers. They are big aircraft based on a Boeing 707 that refuel fighter jets in the air. Now, Iran's 800 Ks, 800 kilometers, about 500 miles away from Israel. So it's going to be very difficult for the Israeli Air Force to stage any kind of attack from here. But anyway, Israel has asked the USA to give us 4 of those aircraft now, like those we want them now. So that kind of tends to, that leads me to believe that maybe Israel is planning some kind of mission with their planes right there in Azerbaijan on the border and wanting these aircraft, these refueling aircraft. I don't know if I've said this before with you, Simon, but when was it? Was it in 75 when Israel attacked the Iraqi reactor? They had
81,
one
1981.
Was it
1981.
81? Okay. So they had one, it was above the ground, and I don't think they were expecting us, and it was successful. But Iran has many multitudes of these nuclear facilities. They're deep underground, and they are expecting us. So I really don't know how Israel would go about that unless they've got some kind of secret weapon we don't know about. But obviously Bennett and Gantz and others in the government and the military are very serious about not allowing Iran to reach that threshold, because if they do, Israel and other places in the Middle East are in serious trouble. And maybe that's one of the reasons, Simon, why many of the other Middle Eastern Muslim Arab countries are, making, peace agreements with Israel. I think primarily to stand against the possibility of a nuclear Iran.
Fascinating. Also hear news reports this week that Naftali Bennett is flying to Moscow for talks with President Putin. And the number one issue on the agenda is believed to be the Iranian regime. And knowing that the Russians are fairly close to Iran, do you think that Israel is sending a message to the Iranian regime through Putin, or is it more the case that Israel wants Putin and the Russians to back off and put more pressure on Iran regarding their nuclear weapons ambitions?
Yeah, well, I think it's kind of mission impossible, Simon, because it's very clear that Iran and Russia are aligned. I think Bennett's probably just doing the best he can, but I don't think we can trust anything that Putin would say anyway. It's probably just a diplomatic, last attempt to try and achieve something. He did the same thing with President Biden in America a couple of weeks ago. But I don't think he said it was a successful trip, and Biden did promise that he would not allow Iran to reach that nuclear threshold. But politicians have been known not to always tell the truth, right? That's being generous. So I guess he has to do it, but I wouldn't place too much importance on the fact that he's going to do that. I think Israel really realizes, even when it comes to America, Israel has to take care of itself.
Absolutely. And also there's news as well that the Israeli Foreign Minister Lapid is in Washington for another round of talks with the Biden administration, as the Biden administration looks set to re-engage with the Iranian regime, open up talks. But of course, that will delay the inevitable, essentially meaning that the Iranian regime will be so much quicker to gaining that nuclear technology they need to create the bomb. And let's not forget that this is probably one of the hardest line regimes currently in Iranian history since the revolution in '79, and they are determined to have nuclear weapons, and there is a great danger that they will fulfill what they've said, and that is to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. The Iranian Supreme Leader Khomeini discusses this. Previous Iranian presidents such as Ahmadinejad have said this, and they are capable of committing genocide against Israel, but also against the Sunni Arab world and Europe as well. So it doesn't seem like the American administration are taking this issue that seriously, knowing that this will make Afghanistan look like a walk in the park.
Yeah. We're talking about Afghanistan and Iran. The good news is, I think most of the viewers will have heard that there's a revival going on in Iran. A lot of Iranian Muslims coming to faith, and apparently we've been hearing the same thing is happening in Afghanistan. But going back to Iran, I think really the only thing that's going to resolve the situation would be an overthrow, or a fresh a change of government there. And maybe with the ever increasing number of believers, I'm sure they're praying for their own country. Maybe that will move the hand of God. And you know, he brought communism down almost overnight, and I think he can probably bring the Iranian regime down as well. And that's the other thing, of course, when we look at the situation. Of course, in the natural, Iran's, you know, much bigger and has got a larger military than Israel's got, and they're heading towards this nuclear capability. But as that South African evangelist, what's his name, Angus Buchan says, but God. So you know, you really have to bring God into the equation, and you know, God's made promises to Abraham and through the prophets, and like he says, for the sake of his good name, he won't. I don't think he'll let, you know, Israel suffer any serious attack from anybody at this point in time, because what's going on here, of course, is a preparation for the return of Yeshua.
Absolutely. And also something we didn't discuss off air, David, and this is the remarkable conference that took place in northern Iraq a couple of weeks ago in Erbil, that over 300 Iraqi leaders, including military leaders, Sunnis, Shiites, heads of NGOs, ex-Iraqi military generals who fought against ISIS and Al-Qaeda, are calling for diplomatic relations with the state of Israel, wanting to join the Abraham Accords, and wanting to make recompense for the expulsion of the Iraqi Jews who had to flee with only a suitcase from 1950 to 1952, with only a small minority remaining. So isn't this extraordinary that with the Abraham Accords, there is a change in attitudes towards Israel in the Arab world? And to think that a conference like that took place in Iraq is absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, well, there was actually a bit of a pullback on that, Simon, after that. I mean, I saw that statement as well after that conference. But there was a lot of, you know, upset Iraqis saying we don't want to move too fast with Israel. But the fact that it's been spoken out, I think there definitely is movement. And you know, it takes time. Even I think I said to you while we were talking earlier, there's even rumors flying around about, you know, there's talks going on in the background with Saudi Arabia. Can you just imagine, you know, Saudi Arabia and Israel with diplomatic relations? It changes the whole Middle Eastern ballgame. And of course, that would influence Iraq as well.
No, absolutely. And of course, the other major news item that we've seen in Israel over the past couple of weeks is the first anniversary of the signing of the Abraham Accords that took place on the White House lawn. And despite the fact there's a change of presidency in the White House, and despite the Biden's administration's continued support for the Iranian regime, for the Palestinian Authority, we pretty much thought the Abraham Accords could probably collapse under this new administration, but this is not the case, is it?
Well, and a change of government and presidency in Israel as well. So not only hasn't it collapsed, it is moving ahead. And Bahrain recently, a week or two ago, opened their embassy in Tel Aviv. They're not quite at the point of doing that in Jerusalem yet, but they've opened embassies in Tel Aviv, and there's been an exchange of diplomats. There's trade conferences going on, and I'm not sure how long it goes for, but there's a major expo in Dubai called Expo 2020. I guess it must have been originally planned for last year, right? But anyway, Israel's got a very large exhibition there. A large number of Israelis are, traveling to Dubai for tourism and checking out that expo as well. I mean, I wouldn't mind going, but I'm not sure that I really want to fly anywhere at the moment. But short term and medium term, those accords are looking good. And my only concern was that those nations wouldn't apply pressure or make it a condition to continue, and they kind of have to a degree for Israel to back off repatriating covenant, the promised land, parts of Judea and Samaria, and also the situation on the Temple Mount. We might want to talk about that as well. There's a few developments there, but the Muslim world is very, very protective of the Temple Mount. So even with Jordan, who we already do have relations with, the Temple Mount is always an issue. So anyway, short term, it's working out well, and I would say we'll probably see a few more of these Arab nations coming on board, probably without the help of America, because the Biden administration just isn't into it. But I think once Trump got the ball rolling and Bibi got the ball rolling, Bennett and co are continuing to flow with it. So I think we'll see, another one or two Arab nations coming in the next few months.
And of course, what's also new is the number of Muslim Arab tourists that are now flying into Israel to visit Jerusalem, to see them for themselves. So, yeah, surely that they will get touched by visiting Israel, by looking at the holy sites, and they're not going there in a hostile capacity of what we'd probably be used to or expecting. But this is really a sign of incredible friendship. And I think a friend of mine sent me a picture of kind of Muslim leaders praying at the Western Wall. I mean, a year ago, this would just be unimaginable, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I saw a photograph in the media just a few days ago of 2 or 3 sheikhs. They look like, they might look like they were from Emirates or Bahrain, with their all their white gear on, standing with their arms around 3 or 4 Hasidic Jews. So that's really quite an amazing group of people to be together. And maybe, Simon, maybe when they come out of their own environment, just that spiritual environment where they are, and come into Israel, maybe, hopefully, let's pray that their eyes are opened to see that some of the things they've been told simply weren't true, and that Israel, we're not the bad guys, because I think it's safe to say that, the vast majority of Israelis, we want to live in peace with our neighbors. I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but I see the Arabs as our half brothers or cousins. We're all descendants of Abraham. So, and of course, in the scriptures in Isaiah 19, I believe it is, sooner or later we all get reconciled. So maybe this is the beginning of that.
No, very exciting. Also, incredible news that the head of FIFA, the World Football Governing, have actually come out and said that Israel could possibly host a World Cup in collaboration with other Arab states as part of the Abraham Accords. Now, for the head of FIFA to come out and say that, that'd be incredible. But what would it mean for Israelis? That I know are football mad. I've got very, very close Israeli friends out there who are just passionate about football, and the fact that a future World Cup could be played in Israel, and maybe the final in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Well, that would be, surely that would bring a lot of attention to Israel, hopefully positive attention. It would bring a lot of, international finances in. And as you say, the football fans here, they would just be literally over the moon to have those matches held in the big stadium in Jerusalem, or we've got a big stadium here at the bottom of Mount Carmel as well. They would just love it. I just wouldn't want to be traveling anywhere on the road while the matches are on. It'll be chaos. But anyway, that's the price I guess you have to pay. But it would in every way, it would be really good for Israel. Maybe, obviously there may be some people that would boycott it as well, but I think the majority would run with it. So we'll see where that leads to, Simon.
Yeah, and one thing's great about the Israelis is their hospitality, and I saw a kind of crucial European qualification game back in 2007. Where England played Israel. The game was shocking. It was at the old stadium, Ramat Gan Stadium, which was almost falling apart, and you're like a mile from the actual football pitch. But one thing stood out was the way that the Israelis put on big fan zones for the English fans, and usually English fans are not really accepted that well abroad, but the Israelis took them to the heart. And when they sung the Hatikva, you had the English fans clap the Israeli national anthem, in complete comparison to what happened the other night when Israel played Scotland for a crucial World Cup qualifier, where there were Palestinian flags. A lot of the Scottish fans booed Israel, and they booed the Israeli national anthem, which is shocking and deplorable. But surely this is something that would give Israel a great goodwill gesture around the world, wasn't it? And that people would be able to see, football fans themselves would see Israel in a totally different light.
Yeah, and I mean, all of that, Simon, is a result of, you know, the misrepresentation in the secular media of what's really going on here. There was also an incident in Berlin at a football match a week or so ago as well. So, as I said earlier, any event that really puts Israel back into, you know, world focus and good light is going to be beneficial for the country. So it's amazing that FIFA has even, you know, mooted that, because often FIFA, and I think what's his name, Mahmoud Abbas from the Palestinian Authority, often he canvasses FIFA to boycott Israel or come down on Israel for various reasons. But anyway, it sounds like there's some people in FIFA who have actually got their feet on the ground and being realistic.
Obviously, it wouldn't happen for probably another decade or so, but still kind of very promising development. David, can you share with us the ruling over the Temple Mount, because this is extremely significant?
Yeah, well, again, about 10 days or so ago, there was a court case. Obviously, some fellow was arrested on the Temple Mount for praying, and he went to court, and the judge decided that Jews have a right, a legal right, to pray quietly. I think he did say, to pray quietly on the Temple Mount. Now, even that would make most people happy. So there was some news in the local media that decision had been made, and immediately the PA and the Palestinian Authority and Hamas and others began to say, you know, if this goes ahead, there'll be trouble. So they were really threatening another wave of violence, which we don't want. And just in the last few days, the government has overruled that other judgment. I guess maybe it was the Supreme Court, because, you know, obviously the government can control the court when they want to. So they just, they had the Supreme Court judge overrule the previous judgment to say it's still not legal, or it's illegal for Jewish people, and that includes Christians as well, in that, to pray on the Temple Mount, which is plain crazy, because, it's not, I don't think the Temple Mount's even mentioned in the Quran, if I understand correctly. And obviously, you know, that small piece of real estate there in Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, is where, you know, it's where Abraham prepared the altar to sacrifice Isaac. It's where the first temple stood, the second temple stood, the Holy of Holies was right there. You know, particularly in the first temple period, the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of the Lord, dwelt, you know, in the tabernacle there in the Holy of Holies. So for Jewish people, it's really ground zero, and like what I call it is God's address on the earth. But it's understandable that there is such a controversy and a conflict over that area. Anyway, bottom line is it's back to the status quo again, which really goes back to when at the end of the 6-day war, you know, a lot of people remember there was somebody up on the Temple Mount with an Israeli flag for 30 minutes. And apparently what happened was some Muslims in Jerusalem, they called up Saudi Arabia, told them what was happening. Saudi Arabia called the White House. The White House called, the Knesset and said, you better get off the Temple Mount. They handed it back to Jordan, to an organization called the WAKF, W-A-K-F. Oh, yeah. Yep, and they basically had control over the Temple Mount ever since 1967. But again, the prophecies are very clear that when Yeshua comes back, he's coming back to a rebuilt temple there. So something has to transpire there, Simon, for the mosque to disappear and for the temple to be rebuilt, but obviously not quite just yet.
No, not just yet. But this was a decision made, wasn't it, by Israel's defense minister at the time during the Six-Day War, Moshe Dayan, to actually hand back the Temple Mount to the Jordanian authorities, which does lead me to a kind of remarkable news story that I read this week, and that was on the Ark of the Covenant and how it could be in four places around the world. It could either be in Ethiopia, it could actually be at Mount Nebo in Jordan, or it could be in Jerusalem, under the caves around Mount Moriah, or literally under the Temple Mount. What would it mean if the Ark of the Covenant was rediscovered?
Wow, that's a big question. I always thought that Indiana Jones had it.
Oh yeah, but we don't know what happened then. It got locked away, didn't it, in a big warehouse.
I love that movie.
In Washington.
My favorite scene is when the Germans open the lid of the Ark and the sky starts turning black, and then the fire of God just comes out of it and melts them. But I mean, there's some realism to that, because that's the power of the God of Israel, right? Anyhow, there's also an option of a church in Ethiopia, where some priest in that church dedicates his whole life to guarding that place. Nobody else is allowed in and out. When he dies, they take his body out and another fellow comes in. I don't know, who was it? The American guy, his name escapes me at the moment, the American archaeologist, Christian guy. He always had the theory that it was in Jerusalem, under the foot of where the cross would have been. And he actually said he'd seen it. He said there's cracks in the ground, and when Yeshua died on the cross, the blood seeped through the cracks, went onto the mercy seat, right? Which it sounds great, and it does follow the biblical pattern that the blood of Yeshua would have had to have gone onto the mercy seat, and maybe it did. But anyway, then he went on to say, it's a secret that it's there, but you can't keep a secret in Israel, right?
Absolutely.
I don't know, but so what would it mean? Wow. For of course, for Messianic Jews and Christians, it would mean just a very valuable piece of biblical furniture, because the Holy Spirit, which used to dwell in the Ark, now dwells in us. But historically, and even for the veracity of the Bible, it would be quite. I think it would be quite a significant event. And like going back to this fellow that said, that some people in Israel knew about it, but it was generally a secret. And the rabbis, it was all over the internet. So, if the Orthodox rabbis in Jerusalem really even 10% believed that, they would have crawled a mile over broken glass just to get there, to get their hands on this thing. But nobody's actually found it yet. So I don't know. Maybe it'll turn up. Maybe it won't.
No, absolutely. No, it's a kind of fascinating thing. And I'm a big fan of Indiana Jones as well. No, it's definitely the best film in the series. I think the Ark of the Covenant.
My favorite.
I
Did
think
you see the news about Noah's Ark, Simon?
No. Some reports coming out that they found through kind of satellite imagery, shape of an ark. Is that meant to be in Turkey, in the Ararat Mountains?
Yeah, well, that's where they say it is. I mean, I watched a video years ago with a similar kind of shape that they said they found in the rock. And, for the life of me, I wanted to believe it, because I like to find, biblical evidence to back up my evangelism. But, and the trouble is, a lot of Christians kind of add up 1 and 1 and make 7 or 8 or 9 or 10. We need to keep it, we need to keep it truthful. So again, what some archaeologists said, well, or geologists, I think they said it could just be a natural formation. It could be, or it may be the Ark. And I do know, Simon, that more and more things are being uncovered in our time, right from the Dead Sea. I mean, the Dead Sea Scrolls was a very strategic archaeological find, and it happened right when the United Nations was voting for the potential, re-establishment of the state of Israel. And of course, some people were saying, well, you can't base the right of Israel to exist on the Bible because the Bible's been changed down through the ages. Well, when they found those Dead Sea Scrolls, they were literally word for word, jot and tittle, exactly the same as what the Jewish people have today. So that kind of blew the United Nations argument out of the water that you can't rely on the Bible. And there's been a lot of other discoveries, things to do with King David coins. There's a lot of things being discovered. So maybe they will find the Ark of the Covenant, and maybe they will prove that that's Noah's Ark. And maybe God's going to use that to try to catch people's attention and bring their focus back to him.
Absolutely. I'm sure they get a lot of attention, especially in Israel. Moving on to kind of some BDS stories that we've seen. So there's two BDS news stories I've seen are common, dominating our kind of news agenda here in the UK. And this is with the Irish author. Her name is Sally Rooney. Who's decided that her latest novel will not be translated into Hebrew. She's said it's because she's against Israel, so effectively supports boycotts, divestments, and sanctions against Israel. And again, here we see this this cultural attack on Israel, don't we?
Well, there's Ben and Jerry's ice cream too from America.
And I'm not eating those ice cream as well. So I've stopped eating Ben and Jerry's ice cream after that.
Yeah, there's look, Ben and Jerry's is good, but there's other alternatives. So I mean, obviously, again, people have been hoodwinked and deceived by what they've heard in the media, and really their arguments, they're not reality. There is trouble here, but really the trouble's not caused by Israel. As I've said many times, I would say 95% of Israelis at least just want to live in peace. It would be wonderful to be able to share, what we have here, the wonderful Mediterranean coastline, the great food that we grow here. It would be wonderful to be able to share it with our Arab half cousins or cousins or half brothers if they were willing to share it with us. But the thing is, the bottom line is, and Arafat proved it, is there's no place for Israel in the Muslim plan. That really they want to get rid of the radical Muslim plan. There's no place for Israel. So Israel must do what we need to do to defend ourselves. And it's like we're the only country in the world that's not allowed to defend ourselves. And again, the army's not called the Israeli Attack Force, it's called the Israeli Defense Force. We purely want to hold on to really the little bit of land that we have, and it's nothing like what God promised yet. It's much smaller. It's even smaller than the British partition that General Allenby and Lord Balfour planned to give us. But anyway, generally what you find, Simon, I know you know it's true, is after a little while, these people seem to disappear, go away, because I think Genesis 12 verse 3 is at work. God blesses those who bless Israel, and he deals with people that come against us. So it's not in their, definitely not in their best interest, short term or long term.
No, absolutely. The founders of Ben and Jerry's ice cream have come out and say that they want to boycott the settlers and not Israel. Now, when you meet the settlers and you see what they've done to the land of Israel, how they are actually the most bravest and courageous of all the Jewish people living in Israel, because literally this is the biblical heartland of Israel. I mean, you go to Shiloh, where the Ark of the Covenant rested, where we see the great battles that took place in Saul's time and David against the Philistines. And you only when you're there do you see why this land is so special and why it's so contested. And I would describe Judea and Samaria as really being only second to Jerusalem, in a sense of you sense God's presence. This is his land. And, there's more, I think, legitimacy that Israelis can relate to Judea and Samaria than they can Tel Aviv or Haifa. Is it not?
Yeah, I remember years ago, before I really understood a lot about what was going on, And there was, in those days, there was a lot of talk about giving back Judea and Samaria. Every time I heard that on the TV or wherever I heard it, I literally felt ill in my, in my stomach, and I didn't understand why until I really began to study it. And not only it is the heartland, as you said, it's the heartland of Israel, and these people want to basically they want to cut our heart out. And what happens when you cut somebody's heart out? They die, which again is the ultimate goal, of course, is to kill Israel. So now I understand why I felt like that, because every time I heard somebody say, you got to cut away and give away Judea and Samaria, it literally felt someone was, plunging a knife into my belly and trying to cut my heart out. And that's how every Christian should feel, because, we're all grafted into the same olive tree, and we all have a future inheritance in this land. And of course, Jerusalem is smack dab in the middle of Judea and Samaria, and that's where the kingdom is coming back to, and that's where Yeshua is coming back to. So really, the bottom line of my message to the church these days is we got to stand up and pray and defend Israel in prayer, and defend our right to hold the land. And for me, I think the two most amazing people groups in Israel are the settlers and the soldiers.
Absolutely.
And I want to encourage everybody, please pray for the settlers and please pray for our soldiers, because our soldiers defend our, not I was going to say right, but they defend our ability to actually live in the land that God has given us. And I remember years ago in the Intifada, someone made a very simple one-liner. It said, if the Palestinians put down their guns, there will be no war. If Israel puts down their guns, there will be no Israel. Which really sums it up very succinctly.
Yeah, I think that was a quote, similar quote by Golda Meir.
Maybe I don't know where it came from, but
yeah. She also said another amazing quote as well, that when the Arabs, something about education, and something when the Arabs learn to love their children more than they hate us, there'll be peace.
That was Golda Meir.
And that was so. Yeah, so she's made some incredible quotes. How do you think Christians are responding to this new Israeli government and adjusting to this new Israeli government led by Lapid and also Naftali Bennett? Because they're amongst the Christian evangelicals around the world, there is so much love and support and affection for the previous Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, for what he did in really reaching out to Christian evangelicals. And it seems also with the recent Feast of Tabernacles that we see encouraging statements made by Naftali Bennett, but also the new Israeli president, Isaac Herzog, who has an incredible British heritage, in that they're beginning to realize again that the Christian support for Israel is the backbone of Israel's support around the world. Do you think there's a realization of that now with this new coalition government in place?
Well, I don't think Bennett is quite in the same place as what Bibi was, and maybe because of his religious persuasion, but I think as time goes on, he'll probably realize again that evangelical Christians are Israel's only good, only not our best friends, but our only friends out there in the nations, and hopefully go a little bit more, out of their way to be convivial and to be welcoming. And as I said earlier, it looks like tourism is going to open up in November if things keep moving in the way they are with the virus statistics. So hopefully Bennett will, learn to really love and accept and appreciate the evangelical Christians. And obviously they did really, most of them did have a love affair with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And Josie and I, we voted for him many, many times, but really he did start to let the country down and various sectors down towards the end there. And right now, Yuli Edelstein, who was a very close political partner with Netanyahu, just when it was last week, announced that he's going to run against him in the Likud primaries. And basically what Edelstein said is that as long as Netanyahu is the leader of Likud will be in the opposition party, basically saying they won't be able to win an election. I think he prefaced that by saying there was 4 elections in 2 years, and there was no outcome, and it would go back that way with Bibi at the helm. So obviously Edelstein is he's already preparing to launch this political campaign to replace Bibi.
Bit foolish, I think, in my opinion. You can have political ambitions, but when it comes to being a political operator, there is none like Bibi Netanyahu, and he's head and shoulders above the other Israeli politicians. I think we've seen that with his leadership and his insight in reaching out to Eastern European countries to form an alliance against the European Union. His alliances that he's made around the world to have support in light of the Democrats coming in and adopting an anti-Israel position, which pretty much they're taking anyway. So, yeah, very astute. So it'll be a very interesting sort of developments happen there. David, can you just give us an update on the plight of the Messianic Jewish communities in Israel right now? Because we've all missed you guys. It's been probably for most of us 2 years. It's certainly 2 years since I've last been in Israel. So it's not an easy time for us when we want to be in the land and visit Israel, eat the food, as you say, visit the amazing sites, and just sense God's amazing presence in Israel.
Yep. And pray on. I mean, I know your prayers. Your prayers will reach the throne room anywhere, but I think there's something extra when you can actually stand in a place and proclaim the scriptures standing in that spot. Anyhow, in the height of the pandemic and the COVID lockdowns, of course, we didn't even have meetings. So most of us resorted to Zoom meetings. But since when was I don't even, so much has changed, but probably since about June, it opened up again. And so we were allowed to have 50 people inside with the seats, fairly well moved apart. And they're allowed to have, I think, 100 people outside. But what we've seen happen is that in that time where there were no meetings, after that ended, a lot of people just didn't come back. Maybe they appreciated just actually having a Shabbat at home, because many of them do meet on Saturday. So there's 2 congregations I'm connected to here in Haifa. There's Carmel Assembly, where we go in the morning, and our eldest son Stefan, who he pastors Caramel, and it's the same situation. They reached their 50 people inside with a few outside, but nowhere near the numbers that we had before these lockdowns. So I'm not sure. Maybe people are afraid to come to where there are a lot of people gathering, but they do broadcast their meetings on Zoom, so we can actually reach out to the nation still. And there have been there's many leadership meetings going on, and there's a ministry called Welcoming the King of Glory, where believers come together and just pray, hopefully advancing the coming of Yeshua. I would say the area where people could pray, Simon, is unity, because again, like I know the situation is in the UK, there's been a lot of conflict even in the body of Yeshua over the virus, over the vaccine safety issue. So that has caused some separation. So we really need to pray. Please, everybody, pray that we'll put that aside, and those that were in fellowship before will return to fellowship with each other and just accept each other's decisions. But that's very, very important, is to reestablish the unity in the land. And then, of course, we want to reestablish the unity with you guys outside the land as well.
No, absolutely. And how can our viewers be praying for Israel and the Messianic community? I think we've got about over 5 minutes left of the program, David.
Okay, for Israel, one word: rain. We had a few sprinkles during Sukkot, and last week we woke up I usually go walking with Josie about 6 o'clock in the morning, and it had rained maybe an hour or so earlier, but it must have been just for a short time. So we really need some solid rain. And when I say that, I mean natural and spiritual rain. So the biblical order is first the natural, then the spiritual. So please, let's pray for the Lord to release the physical rain, because after Sukkot, it's time for the rains to come. And of course, that's what the water pouring ceremony is about on the last day of Sukkot, when Yeshua said, if you're thirsty, come to me and I'll give you living water. He did that exactly at the moment that the priest was pouring out the water sacrifice. And I figure, it's the end of a long, hot summer. Part of that ceremony is to ask God to send the rains. Now, of course, we know that when a nation is in sin, God withholds rain, and Israel hasn't repented, and there's a lot of sinful stuff going on here. But let's pray that God will just extend his mercy and his grace over Israel, over the Jewish people here in the land and in the nations, and that he would release the natural rain, and then follow that up, of course, with spiritual rain, and that many, many Israelis will come to know Yeshua. And, having said that, there is a greater openness here. Simon, Josie led her hairdresser of 18 years to the Lord. Wow. A few weeks ago. We're ministering to a young guy that obviously God's got his hand on his life, and things keep happening. He's very open. His name is Jonathan, if people want to pray for Jonathan to come in. But he's getting very close. But I think a lot of believers could probably share similar stories. So yeah, just rain, natural, spiritual, and let's just pray for shalom, peace in and around Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, Judea, Samaria, the Gaza border, and the northern border.
Yeah, because Israel finds herself very much alone, doesn't she, internationally? We've seen that we've gone from an incredible contrast between the support of President Trump and his administration, even the Secretary of State recognizing Israel's right to Judea and Samaria, and actually visiting Judea and Samaria coming up for this time last year. And we have a government in the White House now that is incredibly hostile to Israel, maybe not openly, but certainly when it comes to their policies and their actions, which speak louder than words. We're seeing that Israel is pretty much up against it. And of course, the US withdrawal from Afghanistan has made Israel's situation even more precarious, as well as the Americans wanting to bring the Iranians in from the cold and re-engage with the Iran deal, plus also pressure probably placed on Israel to concede land for peace with the Palestinian Authority. So is it no wonder that the Israelis are now looking to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob for help at this time?
Yeah, well, that's the point, I think. And look, it was very nice to have a president like Trump supporting Israel in that administration, but I'm not sure that that's what God wanted. And, whatever happens, Simon, we always have to remember that God is still on the throne. He didn't go on holiday. He didn't lose control. He didn't make a mistake. And, if Israel can count on America, they don't need to look to God. So maybe God changed that situation to take Israel's dependency away from America and hopefully turn it back to him. And it reminds me, I think, where is it? Psalm 107, right? On several occasions in Psalm 107, when Israel finally gets to the end of themselves, it says, and then they cried out to their Lord or God, and he heard them. So I think really that's what God is trying to do. And maybe even internationally, Simon, with the COVID, and this is just my thoughts, but I know other people have voiced it as well, is that maybe one of the reasons behind COVID, and I'm not saying God did it, but what the devil means for evil, God turns for good. But maybe this COVID plague is a part of God trying to, recatch or recaptivate the attention of people in the nations to turn back to him, to repent and depend upon him, and not on all of the things that really become idols in our lives.
Amen. And within 30 seconds, also, how can our viewers support you and your wife, Josie, David? Because you are a voice on behalf of the Messianic community in Israel. You connect so many Christians around the world with Israel. So we very much value and appreciate the work you do in your ministry.
Yeah. Well, number one, Simon, please, everybody, just pray for our health, because Josie and I, we've chosen not to be vaccinated. as yet. And so, you know, we're over 65. So please pray that God will just protect us from getting the virus. We don't want to get that. And we are just looking at expanding our Zoom ministry. We're going to start doing some worship. We did a Sukkot meeting with Stefan and Karen, Josie, and people just loved it. The worship was so powerful, just with Karen by herself. She's really anointed. So we're going to do more of that. If people want to find out about that, they could just get hold of us through our website, or just email me at david@outofzion.org, and we'll let you know when that starts to take place. But we really want to bless the nations with this messianic worship from Israel. So just that God would keep us safe and healthy, and give us strategy for the next year's ministry.
Amen. David, it's great that you can join us today on this home edition of the Middle East Report, especially joining us from the Holy Land there in Israel.
Well, thank you, and shalom, and God bless everybody who's standing with Revelation TV, and your family too, Simon.
Thank you. And I just want to thank you for watching this home edition of the Middle East Report, where we've heard from David Silver himself, some of the challenges that are facing Israel, as well as some of the good news stories. And it's just a reminder to keep Israel in our prayers in a daily basis, because we need to pray for Israel and the Jewish people. So thank you for watching this home edition of the Middle East Report.